Thanks, Jerry. Hi, everyone. Again, yes, I'm Fred Stine, work with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and I have the honor to introduce our keynote speakers. Two are here, one that's virtual out there somewhere. So, but before I do that, I wanted to give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what they're going to be talking about today. We're going to learn about the nature-based solutions project that they're working on down in Philadelphia, in the Eastwick section of Philadelphia. But what I feel is makes this more of a compelling story is the human element and a story of perseverance that occurred down in Eastwick for the last 14 years. Back in 2012, a developer wanted to build in a 128-acre parcel of open space down near the John Hines Wildlife Refuge, down near the airport. And a guy was walking his dog one morning and saw a land surveyor out there. This was the first anyone in the community had heard about this proposed development. He learned about it. He made a few phone calls to some Eastwick neighbors. They made a few phone calls and they organized. And 14 years ago, the Eastwick Friends and Neighbors Coalition organized. And today you're going to hear all about these great engineering feats, these H&H studies, coordinating with agencies and politicians and that. But 14 years ago, this group of residents, 9 Eastwick residents, got together and asked surrounding organizations for some technical assistance. They asked the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. We've been helping them for 14 years. But the Friends of John Hines Refuge, the Sierra Club, and University of Pennsylvania, the Public Interest Law Center, all organized and helped this group of residents that had learned that instead of this 128-acre open space land, a developer was proposing 722 apartment units, a parking lot large enough for 1,000 cars, and Philadelphia Airport wanted to come in and put in office space, all in this open space, all in this flood-prone floodplain area. And it was the Eastwick Friends and Neighbors Coalition back then started meeting weekly and strategizing and coming up with to-do lists. They went door to door passing out flyers. They held quarterly public meetings. They met with city, state, and federal elected officials and agencies. They did a door-to-door survey where 96% of Eastwick residents responded to them because they were asked, well, you don't want this developer to come in and do this. What the heck do you want? So they went out and went door to door and asked the residents, what do you want in this? And 96% of the people responded. The overwhelming majority said they wanted open space protection. They wanted a reduction in flooding in their community and building an impervious coverage of apartments and buildings was going to eliminate that, or threaten that anyway. So my point is, and I'm wrapping up here before I introduce, my point for this story is we're going to learn a lot about a great restoration and flood mitigation in that. But it all started because the community came together and organized and worked tirelessly, all while they're working 9 to 5, raising a family, but they're also spending their Saturdays and Sundays knocking on doors and doing all that hard work. So with that, I just wanted to make sure you understood that. I just think it makes the nature-based solution just that much more special and impressive that that's where we are today, 14 years later. So with that, I'm going to just introduce briefly our guest speakers. Do we have Lamar on the phone? Is that how it works? Okay.
I am here.
That's great. I'm going to let them mostly introduce themselves, but it's Lamar is on the phone. Lamar's the refuge manager. Kim Hachadoorian is the Urban Conservation Project Manager for the Nature Conservancy, and Christina Pollack is Director of Resources, Restoration and Resilience with Princeton Hydro. And with that, I'll turn it over to the speakers. Is that, do I? Okay. You're welcome. Do you want to just hold that?
Sure. Lamar, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yep. So I'm Lamar, Gore, the refuge manager on the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge. I've been here for about 12 years now. Manage a staff of 13 folks, and we usually swell up to about 20 with interns and high school kids. And I'll kick it over to you, Christiana.
Oh, thank you, Lamar. So I'm Christiana with Princeton Hydro, as Fred said. I'm the Director of Restoration and Resilience. I've been with Princeton Hydro for almost 18 years now, with a real focus on ecological uplift and restoration projects, whether that's wetland restoration, dam removals, et cetera. And I'll talk about our role in the project. And here's Kim.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Hachadoorian with the Nature Conservancy in Pennsylvania and Delaware. And I'm an urban conservation project manager, and my project work focuses on helping people adapt to climate change through nature-based solutions, and especially helping with flood resilience. So I'll talk more about that.
All right, so Lamar is joining us virtually. Lamar, I think we'll just hand it off to you and let me know when you want me to advance the slide.
Will do. I don't see the slide yet. You probably didn't start it, right?
No, not yet.
Okay. While you're doing that, sorry I couldn't be there with everyone. I had a little bit of an emergency that came up last evening. I really wanted to be there.
Okay, Lamar, we're going to have to do this telepathically.
That's fine, because I've got my other computer up with the presentation there. Are you on the title slide now, or on that first one, that second one?
We are on the titles, or on the first slide.
You can flip it over to the first, slide 2, basically.
Okay, we're there.
And folks, I'm going to start with a little bit of a story. I know Fred just told a little story about how the Eastwick community got energized around things. I've got another story. And I'm telling this story because I want to kind of set the tone for where I see conservation being the most successful today. So I entered the conservation world that explained to me and others an us versus them mentality on how to save dirt and glory in the beauty of things like baby harp seals, pump-out wells, and flocks of waterfowl. And just as a few examples, these are the things that snatched my attention. It was a time when I was incensed by watching trash bags wash up on the Jersey Shore back in the 80s. It was the perfect fodder to bend the mind of a budding conservationist like myself to protect and defend the land in a way that created barriers to success for any of us doing conservation work. It turned me into an adversary to people who were visiting conservation lands, because I was really very much a biologist that wanted to save the dirt and keep people from messing it up. It took me years to recover from that, and it was a real challenge for me. I fought against folks who understood at that time that we needed people who were visiting. We needed our communities to be walking this journey with us. The issue was we were forgetting that people were actually connected to the outdoors already in a variety of different ways. And I say that because across my career, I've watched us say, you need to enjoy X activity, whatever it is, bird watching, because, and we tell the person why, instead of walking with them on their journey, try to understand why do they enjoy the outdoors, and then you're introducing them to other things. And so that's kind of the challenge that we face there. And us as practitioners of conservation, we bear the weight, and I would go far enough to say the responsibility of walking with the public to deepen their connections to the outdoors and to help them build agency in this work that we're all walking in. The work does take longer. I've seen that. It takes longer when you take this approach because you're using social science to walk with people on your journey on whatever your conservation-based projects might be. But I have found that you will ultimately see greater reception from the public. You receive greater reception from the public on these projects. The projects themselves will receive greater reception, and you're building what I call a transformational partnership. We'll get back to that word a little bit later. Historically, as I was trained and how many of my colleagues were trained across my 30 plus years in doing conservation, we simply did conservation. We didn't really see, and there are some people who do, but generally we don't seek real engagement with people who are impacted by the projects, who are going to be looking at those projects across time. And I would say, in short, we engaged just enough to say that we met the requirements to actually do the project. And I would tell you, my colleagues, we have this conversation all the time, that's really shutting folks out and taking away an opportunity for folks to be voices for the work that we do. And we also built, and this is in opposition, well, it's the opposite of those transformational partnerships. I said we built transactional partnerships. And those are those partnerships where one side gets something, the other side gets something, and that's enough. And it's just enough for us to say, look what we did, we satisfied the reports, and we keep moving. We'll talk a little bit more on that later. You can flip it over to the next slide. This should be the map. Eastwick, this map was drawn about 1775. And it looks different than other maps that you see because there's different names on there. I put it up just for context. Context on where things are. If you look to the left of that map, you will see this, just so you can see kind of where things are. Darby Creek and Cobbs Creek over towards the left of that map. But you see a number of different waterways there and a number of different islands on the north shore of Delaware that are really no longer there because of what we've done historically with many of the waterways across Philadelphia. Eastwick, as you know, is located at the confluence of the Darby and the Cobbs there. The broader area here used to boast about 5,000 to 6,000 acres of marshlands. And as you know, I'm sure everyone at this conference knows, it serves to slow down, absorb water, clean waterways, but also in the past serve as food. Some people still use it as food today. Today those lands are really the communities of Eastwick, South Philly, and some communities in Delaware County, just on the PA side. You can flip it to the next slide. Because of the filling, the draining that's been done, the construction that's been done on all of those lands, we have a situation. And the situation is during high tide events and strong storm events, the floodwaters, they literally ravage the Eastwick community. They also ravage the Tinicum community, and some other communities get hit pretty hard too. We've seen a number of heavy storms just since I've been in Hines. The one that really hit us hard in Hines and the Eastwick community recently was Isaias. It wiped the community out, wiped the refuge out, and I don't think historically we really think about what happens when we pull waterways out of an area, a low-lying area. I'm going to move on to the second piece here. In Eastwick, back in the 50s, there were a lot of families that were removed with the promise of an urban renewal plan in Eastwick. It never happened. And what that did was it caused the trust to be broken between the community and the municipality, city officials. There's still a lot of community members to talk about that today. It's going to continue to be talked about. And for me, when we are involved in government, when we're involved in, well, any government, state or federal government, we need to take a listening posture as we walk forward and try to address these problems. You can go ahead and flip over to the next slide, the last slide. As habitat managers and conservationists, understanding how people interact with the environment will always yield the best benefit in conservation as the community's walking with us on those journeys. Repeat of the first section I did here. The earlier we can bring communities into these projects, into these studies, this feasibility study we're working with, the flood mitigation strategy the city's working on, the more success we're going to have. Our role when we do this, it really is to listen. And that's hard. Just try to sit and listen as someone's talking for, I'm just going to say, 4 minutes without saying anything, without saying, I have a question. Try to do that for about 4 minutes. It is hard to do. It does take practice. But that's exactly what the communities need, because they feel as though they haven't been listened to. Their concerns haven't been heard. Action hasn't been taken. And again, I said earlier, it will slow projects down, but ultimately, on the back end, you're going to yield the greatest benefit in the projects, and it will reflect more of what the community would like to see. I describe the work as walking with the community because of that. Sometimes it's very slow, but ultimately it does pay off through what I would call a relationship. I used transformational partnerships earlier, but when we think about these partnerships that we have with the communities, it's really a relationship. Yes, you can use those interchangeably, but I say relationship because as you're building trust with your community, you're also understanding the ins and outs of the individuals, the leaders in those communities. And I could go deeper on that. I'm not going to do that. If you want to talk to me more about it, send me an email. Our email's at the back end. So what this does by building a transformational relationship, it puts the community in a place where they defend, they publicly support, and they share successes of the work that we're doing. Not because you told them to do it, because they're inspired to do so, because you've now built a trusting relationship with the community, and they're inspired by the work that you're building together, so they will jump out and defend and support. Throughout the process of building those relationships, there's a lot of questions that come up, and sometimes you have to sit there and you just got to take it on the chin. And that's happened many times with me, because the community's upset. They're angry, they're frustrated that things haven't happened to support them. When I got to John Hines, I did not understand the flooding issues that were going on. But the community pretty quickly caught me up, and it was through listening that a lot of these ideas and the projects that you're going to hear about were birthed. I mean, they were at their fledgling levels at that time, but we clearly needed to bring more partners in that help us try to figure out the best ways to strike at this problem. The community's questions, they're difficult, but we've got to figure out how to listen to them, how to process them, how to integrate them into our work. And Christiana is going to take a deeper dive into that and try to tease out how to answer the questions that were thrown at us by the Eastwick community. And I can tell you, they will come at you, and they're dead serious, and sometimes point a finger, and you really do have to just listen to that. We don't have success without the community right at our side at the table, helping us make decisions along the way. So Christiana, take it away.
I'm going to stand up here. I'm short, but this room really makes me feel short. So I'm going to do my best here. So I'm going to continue our journey where Lamar started with the refuge about 14 years ago, and sort of following on the heels of what Fred was talking about after the fighting the development. There was a lot going on in the community at the time. The Eastwick Friends Neighborhood Coalition, thank you, EFNC, was very active, and they had a lot of questions, and a lot of valid questions. And around this time, the Army Corps was entertaining informally a levy in the community. It wasn't a formal study that they were doing. It was sort of just a couple people, and the idea of the levy was not received well by the community. It was unsightly. They wanted to know what other options there were, and they wanted to know more about their flooding. The 128 acres that Fred talked about, that it's in a flood-prone area, and they wanted to know, well, we don't want to build in that area, and there was still interest in the redevelopment authority in building, and so there was a fight to be had, but there was more understanding that needed to be had too, and that's where Princeton Hydro was involved. And so when we got involved, we really, oh no, I'm good. Oh, no, sorry, previous. My bad. And when we got involved, we did a couple things. First, we looked at the Army Corps study. We wanted to see, it was a valid study, great scientists, hydraulic engineers that are doing it, but what were they missing? What were they not seeing? And so we took their study and we actually built what we call a two-dimensional model. So they were looking at a one-dimensional model, which is very linear in nature. It's very hard for people to understand, and we took that into a two-dimensional realm. And I'll show you a video of what that looks like in a second. But we took that into two-dimensional realm, which was a great communication tool. For the first time, it allowed the community to understand their flooding from a different perspective. And then we also wanted to say, there's sort of an elephant in the room. No one touched on this, but there's the Eastwick, that's part of the Eastwick community in the picture, and then there's a landfill right behind it. Pretty sizable landfill. And then that's Darby Creek right behind it, and then right sort of north of the landfill, there's the confluence where Darby and the Cobbs come together. And that's ultimately where the flooding originates, at that origin right upstream on Cobbs Creek. And so the elephant in the room was, well, this landfill is causing us flooding. And so these were some of the questions we had to ask. And Lamar's right, like these people, they're knowledgeable, they're educated on the subject, and they're asking the hard questions. And sometimes you have to give them hard answers too. And so we evaluated a couple different stream scenarios to say, well, are there other options other than the levee? The levee, like I said, wasn't palatable to the community at the time. And we said, well, what other stream restoration techniques can we implement that might help mitigate their flooding? And so that's what we set out to do. Next slide. So before we talk about that, I want to just show the FEMA floodplain map. So unless you're familiar with FEMA floodplain mapping and the intricacies, this is a very confusing map. Now the community is aware of it. They know they live in the 1% floodplain, but what does that mean? Some people call it the 100-year floodplain. I like to call it, and FEMA likes to call it the 1% annual chance floodplain, because that storm has an annual chance of happening 1% every year. It's independent from year to year. It's not once every 100 years. So you have a couple things. You see a hatched line up there. So that's what we call the floodway. That's the sort of fastest moving water. But then that floodway just disappears. And it disappears because it's it transitions to a coastal zone. So that's where the fluvial or the riverine or river flows are overtaken by the coastal surge. And so what we have is what we call compound flooding, and I'll talk more about that. But they're right at that nexus. So not only do they have the Darby and the Cobbs coming together, they're right where the coastal flows also meet the riverine flows. You can see the landfill is not in the 1% floodplain. But see those red arrows down there? That's where the water is coming out of the bank. What makes this also quite confusing is we have the Darby and Cobbs Creek. We also have the Schuylkill River nearby. I don't have a map to show you. And we have the Delaware River. So it's not just one or two water bodies. Schuylkill and Delaware are massive systems. And so depending on where that rain event is happening really indicates where their flooding happens. So that's another complexity. And the last point I'll mention about the FEMA floodplain map, people think if they live in the 1% floodplain, they only have a 1% annual chance. That's not true. A lot of these communities, they might live in the 10% floodplain, but that's not mapped. So there's a false understanding of what your risk is just based on looking at the 1%. We really probably should have 10% annual chance. And then so those community members understand it's not just a 1%, they actually have a 10%. And I would say, so Isaias was a fairly big storm, which was about a 20-year or 5% annual chance storm, and that flooded the community. So it doesn't take just a 1% event to flood this community. So going to the next slide, this is what our 2D model looks like. Kim, does it have? I forgot to check this animation. Oh, could you play it? So this is a 2D model. Now this was back in 2016. This was the first time HECGRAS came out with 2D modeling, so it was a newer technology at the time, and it was so valuable in just showing the community how it floods. A lot of them know where the water originates because they see it coming out of the bank, but they didn't understand how it moved through the community. And so I would, do you mind playing it one more time? I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity, communication is everything. And a tool like this was paramount for them to understand what their flooding situation looked like. Thank you. So that was one tool that we had to help communicate the flood risks. And then what we wanted to do, in the next slide. Oh, sorry. now we're in a loop. We wanted to look at what are some typical stream restoration scenarios that might be an alternative to the levee. Are there options here? And so we looked at a myriad of different options. I'm just going to talk about 4 of them. But the pinch point and the floodplain. So up in that green area, that's where the Darby and Cobbs join forces. And then it floods just sort of right where it's sort of at the point, the eastern point of that green hatch there is where the water comes out of bank. And we said, well, what if we gave a little bit more room for somewhere for the water to go rather than in the community? So think of 2 lanes, 2 traffic lanes coming together, merging into 1 lane. You're going to get a slowdown, and that's what happens with water. It slows down a little bit and it backs up into the community in this case. So we said, well, what if we gave it a little bit of room? Unfortunately, we didn't give it enough room, and it didn't make a big difference. So then we said, well, what if we take that landfill, take the elephant in the room, and just carve into it a little bit? Not that in reality we'd be able to. This is a super fun site, and it's closed. EPA loves me when I bring up this topic. But what if we, instead of merging into 1 lane, what if we merged into 2 lanes to give a little bit more opportunity for the water to be conveyed? And unfortunately, again, we didn't see a big difference or dramatic difference in the flooding. I'm going to skip over the landfill and go to the Hook Road construction. So this is 84th Street, if you're familiar with the Eastwick area. It does act as a pinch point, but unfortunately, when you remove that bridge, there's still flooding because there's enough of a constriction all the way from really the refuge all the way up to the confluence. And then the last one, the Clearview landfill. So we said, what if we just removed the landfill? Because at this point, the residents were saying, this is what's causing our flooding. This is why we're flooding. So we did just that. And going to the next slide, we had a very surprising result. And I remember having to call the project partners and be like, you'll never believe what happened. So what we have on existing conditions is we use Tropical Storm Irene to run through our model. This is what flooding typically looks like. So that matches the 2D model that I showed earlier. When you remove the landfill, it's a whole different story. So not only did it not prevent their flooding, it worsened their flooding because there was a new avenue, there's a new low-lying area. So it eliminated a lot of flooding in the Planet streets, which was great, but now the water had a different avenue to go. And so the landfill, while it is a constriction, it's also sort of acting as a levee for the community. And that was something that was eye-opening for all of us. So going to the next slide, thank you. We did this study and we really came up with three conclusions that ultimately led to our final conclusion. But we have a historic land modification. Lamar showed the picture, the historic picture back from 1775, I think he said. There was all islands. It was all wetlands. You had a community, you had natural floodplains. That's the role of floodplains, right, is to hold that flood water. And then you have an urbanized watershed, and then the compound flooding events. And I'll talk a little about each of these. So going to the next slide, this is back in 1894, so USGS map. The green is the freshwater tidal wetland. Phenomenal resource to the community, but you can already see it's already being encroached. You have the Tinicum community and you have Eastwick community up there. You already have encroachment on the wetland. Going to the next slide, we advance about 70 years and you see that loss of the wetland. And then going to the next slide, you have even further loss and fragmentation of the wetlands. So Lamar talked about the benefits of tidal wetlands. They absorb water, they provide habitat, they slow the water, they do a lot for flood mitigation. And when you remove 5,000 acres, where is that water going to go? And you put it in context, it's not a surprise that the community floods the way it does, because now we have perspective. And going to the next slide. So an urbanized watershed, what does it mean to be in an urbanized watershed? So you have increased peak flows, which means your storm events, the flows in your river are a little bit higher than they normally would be because you have an urbanized watershed. Think about everywhere up in the Cobbs Creek watershed. People are trying to get water away from their house, away from their building as quickly as possible and into that river. Well, that water has to go somewhere, and it's going down to Eastwick. You have flash flooding. We saw this a lot with Ida, with 8 inches of rain in 4 hours. So you have flash flooding. And then limited upstream opportunities for flood storage. While there are some opportunities, they're limited just because it is so urbanized. And then you have both catastrophic and chronic flooding at the bottom of the watershed. And what does it mean to live at the bottom of the watershed? Going to the next slide. This is what it looks like to live at the bottom of a watershed. And not just one watershed. So Eastwick is sort of the area with the 128 acres that Fred talked about is the lower black polygon. But they're not only at the bottom of the Cobbs, they're the bottom of the Darby, and you could argue that they're at the bottom of the Schuylkill River. So this community is like a trifecta with flooding. That's what it means to live at the bottom of the watershed. They're getting all of the displaced water from upstream into their community. And then lastly, as if that wasn't enough, going to the next slide, they have compound flooding. So the Delaware River tidal flows meet the riverine flows. And any community member will tell you when there's a precipitation event and high tide is coming, they know that water's coming out of the bank. And so that's a problem too. And then how does sea level rise impact that? How does climate destabilization impact all of that? There's a lot of questions that we still don't have answers to in looking at future conditions. But we concluded that first study with understanding we need a restoration of a coastal floodplain because that's what existed hundreds of years ago. We're not going to remove the airport. We're not going to remove Route 95, Interstate 95, but we have to do something. And so we asked ourselves a couple of questions, going to the next slide, of, well, here's a great map. We have Eastwick, we have Tinicum, and while Eastwick is the focus, Tinicum is also at the bottom of a watershed, and they have a lot of issues, and I don't want to lose sight of that. But you have the airport, but you have the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge, and what a great resource that is. It's a phenomenal resource, and then you pair that with Lamar and his energy and his trust building, and it's recipe for success. And so we said, well, what if we changed a couple things? And going to the next slide, so right now there's an impoundment in the several hundred acre impoundment used in the wildlife refuge. Something that Lamar has wanted to do probably since he first started was convert some of that impoundment to freshwater tidal wetland because that's what it used to be. And so we did some back of the envelope modeling and said, okay, well, what if the impoundment wasn't there? What if we converted it to freshwater tidal wetland where now it can hold water instead of keeping water out? And we were starting to see preliminarily a 1 to 2 feet reduction in flood elevations, which was fantastic. And then we also said, well, what if, going to the next slide, what if there's this 128 acres that sits next to the John Hines Wildlife Refuge? What if it's not developed? What if the city transfers it to John Hines National Wildlife Refuge? And then we can use it for water storage. It's 128, it's actually 124.5. It's a long story. 5 acres is elsewhere. We just call it the parcel now because it's confusing for many people. But what if we can open that to water storage now? What if the refuge had control? And so we were asking ourselves these questions and said, well, we need a larger study. So going to the next slide. We need a larger study. We need to understand what role, at the time we weren't calling them nature-based solutions, but what role can nature-based solutions play in reducing flood risk to the Eastwick community? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim.
Thanks, Christy. So I'll pick up the story from here. I can do. Thank you. So in 2024, we were awarded a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant as part of the National Coastal Resilience Fund. I believe in spelling out all acronyms, so I'll try to keep with that, even though I'm sure you know, most of you know what a lot of these are. And that was to conduct a flood and habitat resilience feasibility study in the Lower Darby Creek Watershed. And the goal of the study is to identify potential nature-based solutions such as floodplain restoration and wetland creation to increase flood resilience for people living in the watershed and also improve habitat for native plants and animals. So we were fortunate to be able to continue working with Christiana and her team at Princeton Hydro on this feasibility study, given their background and understanding of the flooding in the area, and also their experience listening and responding to the questions and concerns from the community. So this photo was taken during a site visit to the refuge, and it includes many of our project partners, including the Flood Mitigation Council of Eastwick, and I might just refer to them as FMCE moving forward. And this is a group of 10 community leaders who have been working with our team and with the City of Philadelphia's Office of Sustainability on their flood resilience strategy for Eastwick, and I'll say a little more on that in a few minutes. And since our project's start, our nature-based solutions team, which myself and Lamar and Christiana are part of, has been coordinating with the city's efforts to ensure that we were aligned with their process and also providing a coordinated opportunity for community members to participate and provide input. So why does the Nature Conservancy come in at this point in the story? Why are we involved in this work? So in addition to addressing the biodiversity crisis, the Nature Conservancy is tackling climate change in various ways, including helping people adapt to a changing climate through the protection and restoration of natural habitats. We envision a world where people and nature can thrive together, and one of the best ways to achieve this mission is through the use of nature-based solutions. So like Christiana said, nature-based solutions are not a new thing. The term is a little more recent and is, I'd like to think, sort of having a moment. So, but what do we mean when we talk about nature-based solutions? So we think of nature-based solutions as any actions to protect, manage, or restore natural systems, including modified or created systems, in order to simultaneously address social and ecological challenges. Nature-based solutions improve habitat value where they are implemented, and they also benefit people in many ways, including increasing resilience to the impacts of climate change. And for this project, we are particularly interested in looking for ways to use nature-based solutions to reduce flood risk for the people who live in this watershed. So thinking specifically about flooding, here are some types of nature-based solutions that can help increase flood resilience. Land protection or land conservation is one of the best strategies for implementing nature-based solutions on a large scale. And this is the focus of much of our work at the Nature Conservancy. The more we can protect existing natural areas in a connected network, the more these systems will benefit people by providing ecosystem services like food and water and climate regulation. Of course, in our cities and other densely populated areas, we don't always have these opportunities, and we're so lucky, like Christiana mentioned, to have the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge in our watershed, protecting so much natural land and providing so many benefits to people living nearby. Floodplain restoration or reconnection can recreate the natural gradual sloping of land next to waterways to help the water slow down, spread out, and infiltrate or sink in, which decreases the volume and the energy in the waterway and helps to prevent erosion. Healthy functioning wetlands act like a giant sponge, which can store, filter, and slowly infiltrate large volumes of stormwater and also provide valuable habitat for native species of plants and animals. And then the last type of nature-based solution I'll mention are stormwater parks. And this is a really great nature-based solution option for highly urbanized areas like our study watershed, because they can be designed to temporarily flood during large storm events to provide flood resilience and improve water quality. And they also provide valuable open space and park amenities for community gathering and recreation. So these examples of the different types of nature-based solutions highlight the benefits they can bring in terms of climate adaptation, especially flood resilience. And nature-based solutions have so many other benefits for people in nature. And you'll often hear the term co-benefits used in reference to these benefits provided by nature-based solutions. And the term co-benefits implies that there's a primary objective and the co-benefits are secondary to that. And of course, that depends on who you ask and who's defining the primary objective. So rather than designating people benefits or nature benefits as primary or secondary, I prefer the term multiple benefits, with the understanding that benefiting people and nature are equal priorities. So healthy natural systems like forests and wetlands in cities and other places where people live help to protect people from the risks of air and water pollution by filtering and cleaning our air and water, and increasing access to outdoor recreation opportunities and just having the ability to spend time in nature and connect with nature really helps to reduce stress and improve mental health. When we invest in restoring and managing our natural habitats, we enhance the biodiversity and functioning of these systems, and that increases their ability to provide valuable ecosystem services for people. So I mentioned the Eastwick flood resilience strategy effort that was led by the City of Philadelphia's Office of Sustainability. And given all of these challenges facing the Eastwick community and the Tinicum community that Christiana mentioned in terms of being located in this highly urbanized area at the bottom of the watershed, we recognize that nature-based solutions need to be integrated into a holistic flood resilience plan that takes a hybrid approach and incorporates many different kinds of strategies. And that's exactly what the City of Philadelphia's Office of Sustainability is doing with their recently completed Eastwick flood resilience strategy. So through this community-driven process, the city has developed a comprehensive plan to address flooding that combines various types of strategies that are aligned with community values. The plan includes structural solutions that are engineered, like the levee that Christiana mentioned that is in process being designed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and also nature-based solutions, including some of the projects being studied by our team. And the plan also includes non-structural solutions like voluntary assisted relocation to provide the opportunity to those residents who wish to sell their homes and move to areas located outside of the floodplain. So nature-based solutions are one of the tools in this flood resilience strategy, and we're always advocating for the consideration of nature-based solutions and asking the question, how can nature play a role to help address this challenge? So we started our feasibility study by spending lots of time listening to community members, voicing their concerns, and describing the flooding problems that they've witnessed in their neighborhood. And this is sort of the listening process that Lamar spoke to in his introduction. So we shared some of the preliminary ideas that we had about possible nature-based solutions projects that could be implemented in and around the refuge, and the ways that those projects might help with flooding, as well as how they could provide other community benefits around health, recreation opportunities, and neighborhood beautification. And through a series of monthly meetings with the Flood Mitigation Council of Eastwick, site tours to visit potential project sites, that's shown in that middle photo, and talking to the wider community at public events like Eastwick Community Day, our team exchanged ideas and built relationships with Eastwick residents to co-develop a suite of potential project ideas to consider for feasibility and implementation. So Christiana and the team at Princeton Hydro then created maps and descriptions for 17 nature-based solutions project concepts based on the community listening phase of the project. And these project concepts were presented to the FMCE at subsequent meetings to create shared understanding of what the projects would entail, how they could provide flood resilience, and how they could be integrated with other strategies included in the city's Eastwick flood resilience strategy. Then we engaged in this process, a prioritization process, where members of the FMCE, the Flood Mitigation Council of Eastwick, considered all of the proposed project concepts, and they voted for the ones that they preferred, the projects that they would most like to see implemented in their neighborhood. So we had these display boards placed around the conference room at the refuge, and our team was there to continue to discuss and answer any questions. And then the FMCE members voted for their top choices. And through this process, we ended up with a list of community prioritized nature-based solutions project concepts. By listening to Eastwick residents, we learned that nature-based solutions are aligned with their community values. So this is a graphic from the city's Eastwick Flood Resilience Strategy Report that shows that Eastwick community members value safe, thriving, and inclusive neighborhoods. And after learning about our proposed project concepts, community members were largely supportive and enthusiastic about nature-based solutions based on their ability to increase flood resilience as well as the multiple benefits they could bring to their community. And residents wanted to see nature-based solutions represented as a significant component of the overall flood resilience plan for Eastwick. And I'm going to end with the words of Brenda, one of the community leaders in the FMCE, who was kind enough to provide us with an interview to include in a video series produced by the Nature Conservancy called Mission Possible about the importance of federal funding. And so the series of videos highlights different projects from around the country that really demonstrate how important federal funding is for these projects like ours.
I've been in this neighborhood since 1970, over 50 years, and I've been through 3 major floods. Unfortunately, floodwaters don't have a time frame. You got to get yourself up, out, and out of danger before that floodwater come and destroy everything in the wink of an eye. There has been work done to the creek, and if you were to look down the creek, you will see that there's logs that they cut down from here to make sure that the creek stay widened so that the force of the water will keep flowing and not stop. Nature-based solution would be able to navigate water through the wetlands to take on this overflow of floodwaters. A lot of people ask, why would you stay in a neighborhood that floods? The key word is that it's our legacy.
See if I can get to my last slide, which is just to say thank you, and are there any questions, and contact info for the three of us. Help. Yay. No questions? Awesome. Oh, I'm just kidding.
Heck grass. It's a U.S. Army Corps tool that's free. Yep. So that's a good question. There's a couple of moving pieces. Kim mentioned the FMCE, so the Flood Mitigation Council, are the community leaders that we meet with regularly. And then there's the city's ongoing flood resilience project, which actually they're just wrapping it up. So that's funded by FEMA, and I don't know if anyone saw, but BRIC funding was reinstated in the last week. So hopefully they'll go after some BRIC funds for their part. For our piece, for the Nature-Based Solutions project, we are wrapping up the modeling and the analysis now. So we're looking at how constructable are the projects, how much do they cost, how much flood benefits are we seeing from them. And from there, we're going to create a story map, which will be an ArcGIS online tool for the community members, so they can see what they've done, and it can also be updated to see where they're going. And then paired with that, the Nature Conservancy was successful in obtaining the next round of NIFWA funding, National Fish and Wildlife funding, for preliminary design for 2 of the projects. So that's moving forward. And some of those other projects, I mentioned the impoundment restoration or conversion, that's at 30% design. Lamar and his team is working with a couple consultants to design that. A lot of the projects that we're moving forward are on the refuge land because those we have owner permission, and that makes it a little bit easier. So we're just moving forward, moving what projects we can forward as we go, and then we'll continue to seek funding to implement some of these nature-based solutions.
It's extremely impressive how you have built the trust within the community. And I think it's really important that we replicate that process in other communities. If you had to pick like the top 3 things that you did that helped to build that trust, what would that be? And if Lamar's still on the phone.
My answer was Lamar. Lamar is the best to answer that.
Yeah, it's not me. I've got a really good team, and they understand from me that how we listen to the community, how we show up at those meetings. And it's not just going to sessions like this, it's also offering up opportunities to beautify in their neighborhoods, beautify places in their neighborhoods. It's supplying jobs to high school kids and college-age kids that come from their neighborhoods. We're doing a lot of things, bringing programming into the neighborhoods. But all of that seeks to build trust with the community. And my team knows that I'm going to prioritize some of those community projects because ultimately that strengthens that trust, it strengthens that relationship, so that when these conversations happen, they understand that we are with them going forward, and not is Lamar, is the refuge, is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service going to do something that's going to harm me? Are they seeking to do that, or is the intent good? That's a part of it. And being able to respond to them when they have needs. That's giving space to them when they have needs, or if they need some technical expertise, I have a staff member or myself. We show up. We do that as much as we can to keep that relationship flourishing.
I would just add to that, just to give some real, like, I feel like a lot of this can be intuitive for some people, and maybe for others of us, not so much. So actual, like, what do I do? So identifying the community leaders who are willing to be like your bridge to the larger community, and then paying them for their time. So we compensate the members of the FMCE with stipends. Build this into your budgets when you're doing your grant proposals, and don't overburden people with asking them to attend gazillions of meetings and answer the same questions over and over again that previous organizations have already asked them. So make sure you know who all is doing this kind of work and coordinate with them. So that was sort of, like I said, we wanted to be plugged into the city's ongoing process because they were already convening the FMCE. So we just plugged into their process rather than create a whole new one. So those are just some sort of practical, really important things to do.
This, Kim reminded me of this, the community leaders that we plugged in with, they have informed us. I mean, I've been here for 12 years, as a refugee for 12 years, and we were struggling in the beginning. How does the community like to receive information? There's some parts of Southwest Philadelphia, the best way is through the Southwest Globe Times. Some people get stuff on Facebook or Instagram. So I can tell you, there's a part of Eastwick, it's putting a note in their door, not in their mailbox, in their door. That was information we heard from them. And so the community leaders helped us understand that. So how does the community like to receive information? Receive information about meetings, receive information about programs that are happening in their community. How do they like to do that? How does the community like to celebrate in the outdoors? The community leaders, they have more of the heartbeat of the community, and that's what we're trying to plug into. I want my team to understand the heartbeat of the community so we can respond well and work with them.
How long did this process take to go from the initial issue to where you're at today? And how do you maintain the momentum for something like this? And obviously probably takes a long time with changing administration and changing priority that the city administrations may have.
Can somebody repeat that? It was broken up for me.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you to answer it, Lamar. So I'll try to recreate it. How do you keep the momentum going? So how long has it taken, sort of, from when this work was started? And it's hard to even say what that point exactly was, maybe. And how do you keep the momentum going through changing times and administrations? Does that capture it?
Yeah, I can start with where my work started at Hines with my current team, and that was in 2014. The community had been kind of battling this since before I was here. I think Corinne arrived, I want to say it was 3 or 4 years ago with the Office of Sustainability. But when I first got here, we started kind of building that relationship with the community. Now, navigating that through changing administrations, I mean, from my perspective, it is messaging to our leadership. It's constantly messaging to our leadership, leaning on the public to message. If you look at the John Hines social media posts, and that's both Instagram and Facebook, we are always messaging how the public engages with the outdoors. We're constantly messaging on those things, putting out stories, sometimes from the public's voice, sometimes we're telling a story. And we started that day one as a means to make sure that our leadership knows that the public really enjoys and supports the refuge. So that's one thing. The other one is whenever I can get the opportunity to get leadership, and that's going all the way up to the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we've also had the secretary here twice. Not the current secretary, but during the last 3 administrations, we've gotten leadership here. And I used every single one of those moments very strategically so that they walk away from their visit with us seeing how important it is for all the user groups at the refuge. And we talk about these projects. We don't hide these types of projects. These projects are beneficial for the community, the projects we're working on here, for the community as well as for habitat conservation. I tell those stories so that they walk away saying, we cannot not support these programs. That's always my angle. It's to make sure that they see the value of what we're doing for wildlife and for the public. And I can communicate that message with anyone. Of course, they can shut me down, but I'll continue to tell that story. And my team knows that too. They understand it. And they're on the same page. Sometimes that can be challenging, but we keep moving forward.
And I'll add to that, the community, they keep us engaged. You know, there was Floyd, there was
That's true.
yeah, there was Irene, Lee, Zayas. So the flooding's not going away, it's getting worse. And so they are the driving force. And when you get to know these community members, you want to do everything possible to help them. Because they love their community and you want to see them thrive.
We have 2 more minutes, so probably one more question, we can wrap it up.
Yep.
I hate to be the voice of sounding pessimistic because I'm really not. But in 25 years, when we're here at the 55th Watershed Congress, you've got 17 proposals here. Given the forecasts of the implications of climate change, are your proposals enough? What will you be reporting in 25 years?
Well, that is part of the analysis, to understand how sea level rise will impact the projects. A lot of the projects we're proposing are tidal wetlands, and the hope is that they can accrete and stay in pace with sea level rise. But yeah, there's a reality to it. What's going to happen when sea level rises 4 feet and the whole community is underwater? And that's what we have to ask, those hard questions, and say what's realistic, what's the long-term plan here, and how do we get the results that the community wants to see, and that they see it in their lifetime.
Yeah, that's a very real question. That's a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for this great session and all the technology that was able to make this possible. I was commenting just now that I don't think we could have done this when we were down at Monco. I don't know that the facility we were in would have allowed us to set up this the way we did today. So this is great. I'm glad that this all worked out and that Lamar was able to be here with us today along with our other presenters.